Reading for this morning is from an intriguing book that I've read from before by a neuroscientist named David Eagleman called Incognito: The Secret Lives of the Brain. And it's about all the ways, the important things that go on in our brains that that we're not consciously aware of, which is about 90% of what's going on in our brain. So this is about free will. The crux of the question regarding the brain and free will is whether all of your actions are fundamentally on autopilot, or whether there's some little bit that is free to choose, independent of the rules of biology. This has always been the sticking point for both philosophers and scientists. As far as we can tell, all activity in the brain is driven by other activity in the brain in a vastly complex, interconnected network. For better or worse, this seems to leave us no room for anything other than neural activity. That is, no room for a ghost in the machine. So in our current understanding of science, we can't find the physical gap into which to slip free will, the uncaused causer, the uncaused causer, because there seems to be no part of the machinery that does not follow in a causal connection from the other parts. Freedom is not free. Last night, the fireworks were going off in my neighborhood. The streets and restaurants are clogged with visitors. And tomorrow, the 4th of July parade wends its way down Main Street to Chatham after our own Eric Riley kicks it off with singing the Star-Spangled Banner. I wish I could be in two places at once, but I'm going to have to be back on Shore Road with the jug band float when Eric performs. The Chatham Parade Committee told us several weeks ago that the theme of the parade was "Freedom Isn't Free." That was a provocative title. So I thought it might serve to guide our thoughts this morning on the 240th anniversary of American independence. Probably some on the parade committee had in mind something like a Memorial Day or Veterans Day sentiment. Freedom is not free means that the freedom that we enjoy as Americans was dearly paid for by the sacrifices of the soldiers who fought wars to gain or maintain this freedom. Here you have two different meanings of free: political freedom, independence from another state, and free meaning no cost, gratis. This is a conventional sentiment, and one which is very much in the forefront on Veterans Day, when we thank all veterans, and Memorial Day, when we remember the ones who died in military service. But here's a confession. I'm never entirely comfortable with those occasions because they have the effect of glorifying war. It is relatively easy for those who never fought in wars to stand around with pomp and ceremony and pay homage to dead soldiers. Those who fought the wars are less inclined to glamorize them. In a larger sense, what makes America free and keeps America free is not the military, but the ordinary people and their habits of civil society. Go to New England town meeting, and you will hear all points of view expressed and given a fair hearing. Democracy works, my friends, because it is deeply ingrained in our habits. Killing people overseas with large ships and planes and guns and bombs may be a part of what makes freedom. But our stance in the world is very influenced by the power of the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about to sell its latest toys to Congress. Yes, if what we're buying with our military might is freedom, it certainly isn't free. We spend far more on armaments than any other country in dollar amounts. More than that, we spend more than the next 7 countries on the list combined. The next 7 are China, Saudi Arabia, Russia, the United Kingdom, India, France, and Japan. Certainly all that military muscle gives us power and influence in the world, and maybe that is one definition of freedom. But I'd like to see us have influence by our adherence to our values. This brings us to freedom as a value. A little less than halfway from the first Independence Day to today, Abraham Lincoln proposed a kind of mission statement for America when he said, 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. This has two parts. The first is conceived in liberty. I don't think Lincoln was referring solely to the realm of ideas in his use of the word conceived. Rather, he was making an analogy to human reproduction. As the act which unites the sperm and the egg in the darkness of the womb sets a zygote on the path to becoming an embryo and then a human being, so the declaration of separation from the mother country, of the end of the status of royal subject, and the beginning of the status of democratic nation among nations, set us on the path to becoming the nation we are today. We became a separate entity in the act of dissolving the connection to Britain. This was liberty. We would no longer have taxation without representation. We would no longer be subject to laws passed in an assembly to which we sent no delegates. We would gain authority over our own affairs. That is one definition of liberty. But the other half of Lincoln's formulation is just as important, the declaration that all were created equal. Now, I left out a word there, didn't I? It said all men. And I'm thoroughly familiar with the arguments that this is patriarchal language, and no one would argue that the sexes were anywhere near equal when these words were written, and certainly the Continental Congress had no female delegates. But I think a reader of the time might have taken men as shorthand for people, since it was so used generally until the latent sexism of that usage became apparent in the last century. But even if we read men to include women, there were two glaring inconsistencies in the statement of equality. The native inhabitants of North America, whose land was gradually being wrested from them by force, were left out of the equation. And 500,000 humans of African descent were held in chattel slavery. That is, they were regarded in the law as property, in essence, no different from cattle. Just 4 years before the Declaration, in England, a legal case called the Somerset case had ruled that slavery was not consistent with the laws of England. An Englishman stationed in the British Army in Boston had purchased a slave there and brought him back to England. The slave escaped, and the master had him recaptured and was going to send him to Jamaica to be sold. The court, however, ruled that when the slave came to England, it was inconsistent with English law to send him back to a slave jurisdiction against his will. This development in English law, this case, had two effects. One, many U.S. colonies began to abolish slavery, even while the Revolutionary War was still being fought. Vermont in 1777, followed by Pennsylvania in 1780, Massachusetts in 1783, and Connecticut in 1784. But before it had that effect, it brought both abolitionists and pro-slavery forces in America to support separation from England. Remember that the Declaration of Independence was issued more than a year after the military action in the Revolution had begun. In November of 1775, John Murray, 4th Earl of Dunmore and Royal Governor of Virginia, issued a proclamation declaring martial law and promising the slaves of Virginia that they would be freed if they came over to the British side. During the course of the war, more than 80,000 slaves escaped from their plantations and took him up on this offer, but eventually he was forced out of the colony. Dunmore's proclamation had repercussions in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, who was a substantial slaveholder in Virginia until the day he died, had drafted an anti-slavery paragraph for the Declaration, complaining of the British king, quote, "He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating its most sacred rights of life and liberty in the persons of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in their transportation thither. This piratical warfare, the opprobrium of infidel powers, is the warfare of the Christian king of Great Britain." Now this is a draft paragraph for the Declaration of Independence, a complaint against the king. "Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought and sold, he has prostituted his negative for suppressing every legislative attempt to prohibit or restrain this execrable commerce," that means bad, "and that this assemblage of horrors might want no fact of distinguished guide, he is now exciting those very people to rise in arms among us and to purchase that liberty of which he has deprived them by murdering the people on whom he has obtruded them, thus paying off former crimes committed against the liberties of one people with crimes which he urges them to commit against the lives of another." Unquote. Can you believe that? This is the height of hypocrisy. For the slave system that Dunmore was trying to exploit to gain a military advantage was willingly maintained by the colonists as part of their means of agriculture. It was hardly rammed down their throat by the British monarch. But the important thing was that the language Jefferson proposed was abolitionist in sentiment. It starts out, "He has waged cruel war against human nature itself." So that fits in with the other language about inalienable rights. So, hey, the slaves are human. They have a right to be, therefore, free, if everybody else has a right to be free. It was abolitionist in sentiment and consistent with the statement that all were created equal, and that was why it had to go. Pressure from the South Carolina and Georgia delegations, as well as northern delegates who profited from the slave trade, forced Jefferson to water down his paragraph to complain about insurrections in general. The South Carolina delegation included a collateral ancestor of mine, a connection I have always been proud to claim until this day. The threat of the Southern colonies to withdraw support from the document, with a full-scale war already underway, was enough for the abolitionists to give way, and we have a declaration which announces that all persons are created equal while conditions of the most profound inequality, sanctioned by law, held 40% of the inhabitants of the South in misery. The Declaration of Independence created freedom for the white and privileged. For those who did not fall in these categories, freedom was not free. Let's turn to another aspect of freedom. To many of a conservative bent, the most important aspect of freedom is free markets. This will encompass the rights of businesses to do as they please, to maximize their profits without a lot of interference from government. On the consumer level, it encompasses the right of each of us to buy whatever we want, whenever we want it. And with the internet, our ability to satisfy our consumer desires has expanded vastly. We can shop in our bathrobes. A couple of months ago, I saw on eBay a musical instrument I've always been curious about, called a trumpet fiddle. It was being offered from Romania, and it was cheap. I clicked, and a few weeks later, it showed up at my door. What joy! You can hear it in the Jug Band concert on the 21st. This is a consumer definition of freedom, the ability to get whatever you want. Netflix offers you any movie you want. Spotify, iTunes, and Pandora offer you any music you want. Amazon will get you any book you want, or pretty much anything else. In your PJs. Freedom from the oppression of having to get dressed, or go outdoors, or deal with people directly to get exactly what you want. This might seem like what the Declaration of Independence meant by the inalienable God-given right to the pursuit of happiness. Yet, from a Buddhist point, the relentless urge to consume, to buy and eat, and get, is not happiness. It is suffering, or dukkha. Happiness, nirvana, is being free from all wants, not getting what you want. The first of the Buddha's Noble Truths is that dukkha, translated as suffering, or better yet, unsatisfactoriness, is everywhere, is endemic in the human condition. The second Noble Truth is that the source of dukkha is craving and clinging. So American consumer culture teaches that freedom is being able to get what you want and do what you want. The Buddha teaches that freedom is the freedom from wanting. From a Buddhist perspective, consumer freedom is not free. And then there is the philosophical problem of free will. You knew I'd get around to this sooner or later, didn't you? Free will is intimately connected to moral responsibility. St. Augustine insisted that God, though all-powerful and all-knowing, was not responsible for all the evil in the world he created because he had chosen freely to create humans with free will. Therefore, we are responsible for all the evil in the world. The criminal law takes up this theme and will not hold the person criminally accountable unless the criminal act was the person's own free will. If the defendant was insane or sleepwalking or was coerced by actions or threats from another, he or she could not be punished. But does free will really exist? Do we really have choices about what we say or do? Neuroscientist David Eagleman says there's no definitive study of the brain that confirms that humans exercise free will. Generally, science is based on determinism. We look for the causes of anything that happened, and when we find those, we look behind them for what caused them. We find most anything that humans do is caused by the brain. But brains do all kinds of things which clearly don't result from conscious choice. A sufferer from Tourette's syndrome may have tics that cause his limbs to jerk, and may utter a string of profanities or embarrassing observations at any time. But it is not just the abnormal brain. Every brain drives the behavior of its owner. Eagleman says, quote, "So in our current understanding of science, we can't find the physical gap into which to slip free will, the uncaused causer, because there seems to be no part of the machinery that does not follow in a causal connection from the other parts," end quote. In his book, Incognito, Eagleman describes an experiment designed to test whether actions that are apparently freely chosen really are. Back in the 60s, the subject is asked to do a very simple action. Raise your finger. Whatever time you choose, raise your finger. The subject is watching a high-resolution timer and is asked to note the time at which he forms the intention to raise his finger. He's also hooked up to electrodes in his skull. What the experiment showed was that the subjects were aware of their desire to start raising their fingers about a quarter of a second before they actually raised it. But the electrodes recording brain activity over a second before that. So did the subject freely choose to raise his finger? Or did the brain activity tell him it was now time to raise his finger? Where is the actor? Well, I'll let you chew on that. I will not solve the problem of free will in this section of one sermon. But I want to note that it is a problem bequeathed to us by our religious ancestors. Early universalists like Hosea Ballou believed in a deterministic world. God was so completely in charge that all futures were known. In that respect, they resembled the Calvinists. The Unitarians, by contrast, believed in free will, and you could, by choosing what you said or did in this life, opt for heaven or hell in the next. If you believe in determinism, the freedom that you think you have is an illusion. Freedom isn't really free. You're just not looking hard enough for the real causes of what happens. That's a lot for one sermon. I've given you a smorgasbord of senses for the phrase, freedom isn't free. It can refer to military exploits of the U.S. Armed Forces, which have vindicated American freedom and freedom around the world because of service in wartime and peacetime, accompanied by vast expenditures of money as well as lives and health. Freedom is also the value in which our nation was conceived according to the Gettysburg Address, although that value has always been at odds with the other value held up at Gettysburg, the value of equality. This conflict was acutely present to the minds of the founding fathers and was resolved in the drafting of the Declaration of Independence by dropping Jefferson's abolitionist paragraph due to military necessity rather than any consideration of morality. They kicked the can down the road, and 3 generations later, the entire country almost came apart, and we're still dealing with the racist repercussions. A third sense of freedom is not free deals with our consumer society, where buying and selling, buying and getting and satisfying our wants is held up as the supreme virtue, except that a Buddhist perspective, and to be fair, values from Christian, Jewish, and Muslim traditions as well, would critique this syndrome and hold that true freedom is the freedom from being a slave to our desires. And a fourth sense of freedom is not free questions whether there is any such thing as free will, whether our feeling that we are acting freely is an illusion. The law protects our freedom, but within limits. Your freedom to swing your arm ends where my nose begins. What I want to suggest is that there is and should be no such thing as absolute freedom. All freedom is in some sense not free. Now, go enjoy the parade and buy a hot dog right out front here.